I've watched so much porn the last 3 days. Like, I'm starting to watch normal movies and like wonder why aren't they having sex yet?
Yeah. Well,
I was watching the 1966 Batman, and I was like, when is Catwoman going to start disrobing?
Where's the bush?
Ooh, all right, then I will start with the little intro here. You ready, Seth?
I am.
Are you fluffed?
I'm fluffed. Yeah. No, I heard that's a myth. I heard they don't do that.
I think it's probably mostly pills nowadays. Hello and welcome to Unwatchables, the podcast for films that put the sin in cinema. I am Marc Dottavio.
I'm Seth Troyer.
And today we're exploring the golden age of porn, that bygone span in the 1970s when hardcore pornography opened in theaters, sometimes to both commercial and critical success. We'll start off by discussing the unprecedented box office of 1972's The Devil and Miss Jones, and then we'll compare two other touchstones with very different artistic aims. 1976's zany adult comedy, The Opening of Misty Beethoven, and 1978's grim cautionary tale, Her Name Was Lisa. Time to set your tabs to incognito.
Oh my god, I will.
Ooh, good. That was a good one.
My favorite part of this is the corny introduction. That's honestly, I work the hardest on that.
Sin in cinema.
Yep. I did. I had to take a break from my go-to for a lot of these movies, effedupmovies.com, and on this one, I had to just hop on over to Spank Bang. So maybe that's our sponsor for this episode. But I thought, you know what? I'm not going incognito. This is for work. This is for the podcast. I'm doing this on the browser history.
See,
you need the receipts for the taxes.
I was ex-hamster for all of them, which I'm always like, what is the hamster? Why is there a hamster involved?
I don't want to get a hamster involved in that.
Yeah, in this way, those sites like, YouPorn and XTube and stuff are actually helping preserve some slice of cinema history by hosting these films, because you're not going to find them on Netflix or Amazon or Hulu.
Or Pornhub. I was amazed. Pornhub doesn't have a lot of these vintage porns anymore.
Yeah, they've jumped the shark.
Well, if I could jump in to mention, I had DVDs, so very.
That's
classy.
Way cooler.
Very
was just thinking about while I was watching these. I kind of want to just start a collection. These would be just really fun to have. As far as because I don't usually care about physical media, but for some reason, I feel like these would be great things to have.
Well, they look terrific, so that helps a lot.
I believe you.
Yeah, I watched some transfers that were from Blu-rays of them and looked really good. So,
absolutely. Yeah.
God bless
restorations.
They're restoring even the porno chic era.
Mm-hmm.
But anyways, speaking right now is our very special guest, Jetta, joining us from Brooklyn. Jetta, it is so nice to have you.
Thank you.
Others may know you on Letterboxd as the Iron Cupcake. And I noticed that you have quite a selection on there as far as reviewing old exploitation movies, even the pornographic films from this era. I mean, am I correct in that you're kind of, that's almost what you're drawn to, or your expertise in a way?
Well, I'll watch anything. I mean, I'm interested in pretty much anything that piques my interest for whatever reason. But yeah, in particular, I'm drawn to films that challenge notions of what's taboo. I'm always interested in censorship, the history of sex in film. I'm just interested in pretty much everything that covers. So whether it's the pre-code era or films from the 50s and 60s that began to challenge the production code and led to the creation of the rating system, and then porn, there's just so much to think about, and to kind of ask yourself, does this really show what America was like at that time? And I feel like the films we're going to be talking about today are providing a really interesting window into just what was going on in film in the 70s and in pop culture. And politics. So I don't know. There's a lot going on there that I just am fascinated by. So yeah, my reviews kind of run the gamut.
You know, I'm on this podcast called Unwatchables, and I think you would be perfect. You should be on it sometime. I think it would be great. We're doing a porn episode. I think you'd fit right in.
Absolutely.
So if you're not doing anything right now,
Absolutely.
I think you fit right in.
I mean, I've never been on a podcast, so I'm extremely nervous, very anxious, but excited. So somewhere in moderation, I'll figure out the right level.
Worry not. There's only millions of listeners that we have. Well, we do have one fan in Ireland, we just found out. So that's kind of cool. Okay. So pressure's on.
Okay.
Yeah, person by person, we're reaching different continents.
It's a start.
Yeah, but you're right. These movies are, if nothing else, time capsules, is either literally in the era that you're seeing, but also just in their sensibility. This is a whole disappeared genre, really. And I knew nothing about it. These were my first full-length adult films, at least that I can think of. And for anybody who's not familiar with that, these are from what is considered the golden age of porn, which roughly, according to Wikipedia, stretches from about 1969 to 1984.
Yeah, but that's about right.
Yeah, it's mostly a 70s thing. If you've seen Boogie Nights, that's kind of the era that it's covering in there. And the Burt Reynolds character is always talking about this ideal of he wants to make a movie that after everyone in the audience gets off, they want to stay in their seats to see what happens in the plot. Mm-hmm. And that's what these movies are.
Yep.
Yeah. And I think that the one that's still most associated with that era is Deep Throat from 1972, which I did not get a chance to watch. And we considered talking about on this podcast, but I ended up being more interested in The Devil and Miss Jones, which is by the same director. And from what I can tell, actually was a bigger box office success even, although it's a little hard to tell. I think the receipt taking with these movies was not very stringent. There's even some suggestion that they were financed by organized crime, and there might have even been some money laundering going on. So it's kind of hard to get an exact number. Like The Devil and Miss Jones, like I read some places it was the 7th most successful film of 1973, or maybe it was the 10th. But either way, it still made more money than some like actual classic films that came out that year, which is kind of funny.
Yeah. Right behind Paper Moon, I think I read.
Yeah, Paper Moon and a James Bond film, I think. Live and Let Die. Yeah.
Hey, you gotta keep up.
Yeah. But yeah, we decided against Deep Throat because it didn't sound as interesting, and Linda Lovelace has since stated that she was coerced and even sexually assaulted on camera in it, which kind of just put a bummer over the whole thing.
Yeah. I mean, I think that was talked about at the time. I mean, right away she denounced the film, and I think maybe even a year after having made it, or 2 years after. I think she made a few more films, but almost immediately she claimed that it was coerced in every possible way, and she went on talk shows, wrote a memoir about it. So there are many reasons not to have chosen it for today. I think it's still worth watching just to see what it's like and to have the experience of it, but it's also a terribly made movie in many ways and not at all reflective of Damiano's artistic abilities to the extent that you could call them really artistic. The Devil and Miss Jones definitely has more of a sense of, auteurism, I guess. So yeah, a better choice for sure.
I had no idea it would be so surreal, this movie. I was really pleased, and I didn't realize it was based off of No Exit by Jean-Paul Sartre, like loosely, from what I was reading.
A bit loosely,
yeah, but real loosey goosey. But
it's really more the ending.
Yeah. Well, you can tell there's like some kernels there, and they are just like, even the departures he's making are these interesting ideas going on. Really unexpected, surreal turns. I love the plot in it. It really commits to the fantastical kind of dreamy atmosphere of the whole thing, which kind of uh, it is interesting. All three of these movies we're covering have like very specific sexual tones, in my opinion. Like this one is very much in like very committed, like erotic, almost like in the realm of fantasy or something.
Yeah.
And then Beethoven is more of this like sex comedy, like sort of the silliness of sex, I guess. And then finally, her name was Lisa, has more of that like kind of rough, dark, tougher kind of sexuality going on. I found that interesting about these three going together, this threesome.
I think they're great examples of how of diverse, the different purposes that these movies can have. And I was interested to learn that a lot of this like explosion of these hardcore movies in the 70s was because of a Supreme Court decision, Miller v. California from 1973, that kind of changed the definition of obscenity, or it limited it more so that it would have to be something that had no artistic merit. And I think that these porn movies kind of got around that by saying, look, these do have some sort of artistic merit. There's production value. There's a perspective that they have. There's a script. And that kind of resulted in these movies that were like, all right, we can play in theaters and not get in trouble with the law if we have some sort of way that we can argue that there's more to it than just the prurient part, the sex. And it's just, yeah, it's fascinating to me to think about porn as a genre, and in these three different ways we'll get to explore that. But I don't know, I was trying to think of what, how would you define a porn movie, and I think it's as simple as having the sex scenes in them kind of serve the same way that the action scenes do in an action movie or in a comedy. Whatever the movie can do, whatever else it wants to do, but if it's not aiming for laughs in particular points, then it's not really a comedy. And a slasher film has the set pieces where someone gets killed, and you expect those beats all throughout the movie.
Yeah, it's something easy to knock about that kind of film or that kind of art, but anymore I find it very just functional. I see it as like functional art. Like even like dance music is like, if it's not getting you going and not getting you dancing, like there can be all kinds of artistic merit to it, but like it's still like its major function is to get you dancing, and there's nothing wrong with that. It's very like it serves a purpose rather than like more of an abstract sort of thing. I kind of appreciate that, and I think it's wrong to kind of knock it. I'm really excited we're doing this episode. I think it's like it is back to Burt Reynolds' whole thing. It is this interesting thing about a lot of people watch porn, like of course, like almost everybody does, but the question of Unwatchables is like actually in 2022, like sitting down and watching all 90 minutes of porno, which now we watch like little clips, little things that we find and stuff. And I think it is interesting to actually take the time and sit through a whole one.
Well, if nothing else, I think I should impress upon you all the fact that Gerard Damiano and Radley Metzger were in the DVD commentary tracks, again, to pretentiously point out that I listen to DVD commentary tracks.
Yeah.
They were both really proud of the fact that every single line of dialogue in both of those films was taken right from the script. They really worked hard on the script. They really wanted the viewers to know that there was so much effort put into everything that was happening on screen. Although there was an improvisation in The Devil and Miss Jones, which we'll get to when we get to that.
So. Hey,
I
memorized my lines. I memorized my lines. I hit my mark. Can you believe it?
Real acting.
And they,
Badass.
and Letterboxd now actually lists adult films, or at least certain ones. They made a decision, I think as of last year, that they would list a curated selection of historically, culturally, controversially, and artistically significant adult films. And if nothing else proves that these are being worthy, of evaluation and study and enjoyment, it must be that, because there's whole communities of people who are wanting to have it be a part, of the cinema lexicon.
It should be. I feel like they've got like commercials you can rate on Letterboxd and shit. So yeah, I've seen all kinds of shit on there.
Yeah, I wish they wouldn't put TV shows on there. I think that's cheating, but
a great controversy.
They'll do that.
Oh, man, don't get everybody started.
Yeah, and I think that what killed the whole thing was home video, basically, where people did ultimately decide that I would rather watch porn at home without strangers around. And that pretty much, just like you see in Boogie Nights, killed the whole scene. They got lower and lower budgets and had no artistic pretensions for them anymore. And then when the internet came along, that just furthered it, I think.
Right. I mean, making films on video rather than on film, all of a sudden there was no longer any pretense as to making real capital F films. It was just, make whatever you make in the shortest amount of time possible, and don't even try to pretend that it's filmmaking. So, once that became the norm, I think there were fewer people who wanted to be directors. It was just a matter of creating content.
Yeah,
so you're not going to see more Radley Metzgers after the 80s.
Yeah, that's too bad. So, but let's go back in time to that glorious era, 1973, The Devil and Miss Jones. You brought up Gerard Damiano, again, who of Deep Throat, and he actually appears in this film. He's the guy in the cell in the opening and ending, mumbling about a fly and refusing to touch poor, what is her name in this film?
Justine Jones.
Justine Jones, played by Georgina Spelvin.
Mm-hmm.
Or at least that's her stage name, right?
Right, to kind of satirize, I guess, the name George Spelvin, which apparently was often used by theater actors when they played two roles in a play and they didn't want anyone to know that they were playing the second role. It had to be a big surprise. So they would use George Spelvin in credits, and so I guess Georgina Spelvin figured this is a nice way to pay homage to my theatrical roots.
Yeah, it's like an Alan Smithy type all-purpose name.
Yeah.
But yeah, the opening of this movie, I think it really grabbed my attention right from the get-go, right? It's so ominous.
Yeah, I mean, it feels... I mean, it's shoddy, it's lo-fi, but it feels arty, like the music, it's very much atmospheric, slow panning camera of her like getting naked, slowly going into her bathtub.
Oh, I mean, even before that, before the opening credits, where she's like forlornly masturbating and
I forgot about that.
Begging this guy to touch her, and he just is sitting there mumbling like madness about a fly and has no interest in touching
the
her.
framing foreplay. I forgot.
Apparently, Damiano didn't... I'm not sure if it's that he didn't want to put that in the film at the time where it is, but he felt years later that it was a mistake to do that. I guess he figured that it was necessary just to keep audiences in their seats for the first 2 minutes. Like, this is going to hook them in more than if you just open with the suicide. But in retrospect, he felt like that was a mistake because it was just kind of cheap. I don't know. I mean, I think it's kind of interesting to see the end at the beginning and then to circle back to it.
It's also kind of scary. It's intense. Yeah. Like
ominous, yeah.
Whoa. And you're only seeing her like face for the most part. And then you get some clips here and there, but it's just like kind of intense and disturbing beginning.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Yeah, and then right into the opening credits that I thought were very cool too, just elegant and
satanic.
They had this moody like piano kind of string score underneath it, and I was hooked.
That's another really interesting thing about the film, which, I mean, I don't know if there had never been an adult film at that point that used an original score, but this was the first really major one. And so the idea of not just using a catalog of stock music, actually creating original music to, set the tone, I don't know. I mean, I think that's interesting. It's on Spotify, so, I don't know.
I liked it.
Listen to it
that's awesome.
I liked the soundtrack. I think it was a really vital part of this movie that is so, like, atmospheric and kind of more sensory than dialogue driven a lot of the time and stuff. It really helps the sex scenes in particular. I looked him up. I forget his name. I think Schumann is his name.
Walden Schumann.
Yeah, I couldn't find any other releases by him, at least from what I was seeing.
I think he was a songwriter, because I remember looking at his IMDb page and something that he'd written was used in Crazy Rich Asians.
Whoa, I think. Weird.
So apparently he wrote some popular songs that have
Here we are now.
stood the test of time.
Wow.
That's great. Yeah, and then after that is the scene that you were talking about, Seth, this pretty prolonged suicide, basically, where the main character is, gets into a bathtub and slits her wrists, and there's some moody lighting. We get more of that music. There's even a depth of field, like a rack focus shot, like of the the razor and her reaching for it, which is like, oh man, we're not in porn Kansas anymore.
For sure, some lingering on her naked body in the bathtub.
For sure.
Which is always an important thing to remember in 2022, like just how much of a big deal it was to be able to see a naked person on camera. Just like, wow, like it was just it just kind of like, it's an easy thing to just like kind of glaze over and be like, yeah, okay, there's some nudity or something, but even a like subtle shot like that of just like a lady in a bathtub was probably a bigger deal than we think as viewers now.
And I think it's also interesting that I don't know if you've read about the history of how Georgina Spelvin was cast in the film, but she had this interesting kind of winding road to getting there, wherein she was a dancer, theater actor, didn't really get the job she wanted, so she started working in craft services. I think she actually had some training as a film editor. She had a film collective that made anti-war films, which is fascinating. But she was hired as a cook for The Devil and Miss Jones. She was supposed to just, provide craft services. And when I think it was the actor Marc Stevens who appears in the film, he's in the last two sex scenes. He was working with Georgina Spelvin on a previous adult film called The High Priestess of Sexual Witchcraft, which is amazing. And so he suggested, well, why don't you come work on this film? And that led her to meeting Gerard Damiano, reading some lines, just like as a favor to work with another actor. And everyone realized, oh my God, she's Justine Jones. So that's incredible. But unfortunately, also, when you listen to interviews with Gerard Damiano, and I think also things that Harry Reams had said at the time, apparently nobody thought that she was pretty. And so all of Gerard Damiano's discussions of what an incredible performance she gave, starting right at the top with that suicide scene, is all given with the asterisk of, well, she did pretty well. She was pretty incredible, even though she wasn't pretty. And Harry Reams even said at the time, well, she's totally flat-chested, and she, is so totally plain. What are we going to do with her? And so it's just so fascinating to think of that first scene and how impactful it is just from a dramatic perspective. I mean, that's tough when you're watching that scene and you're thinking about this being an adult film meant to titillate. I mean, it's so dark. It's just so depressing. And I don't know, maybe this is going off on a long tangent, but I just think it's so interesting that she was able to convey so much emotion, and at the same time, the director and other cast members were thinking, well, if only she were a little better in this one department. So, I don't know, what do we do with all that information?
No, I mean, I was going to say she's my favorite lead of all three of the movies we watched. I don't know, and I think it is partially like, yeah, she looks sexy to me. I find her sexy, but for me, it's about her commitment and her acting, and like the way she can just like really get in there with the way she speaks during the sex scenes just is so convincing. She's amazing in this. I think she really I don't know, you never really see the page all that much when she's saying her lines. I feel like, especially again during the sex scenes, you really get the idea that, I don't know, like either she's real good at acting or she is just really into the sex. Where I just really don't get that as much from the other sex scenes in the other movies we watched. I feel like, and it's part of why this one is my favorite one of the three that we watched, I think.
Well, she has said in interviews it was all acting. Apparently, she never took any pleasure from any of the sex scenes she made at all in her career, and she really only began to experience whatever heights of ecstasy she was performing in film when she met her husband in the 80s. So it's all incredible.
So
act.
she wasn't really that into snakes or grapes and bananas.
Well, that's an interesting story.
Well, here, before I do want to get to the snake thing, but just in case anyone who's listening hasn't seen this movie, the next scene is her just in like an office where she's basically being processed in the afterlife and finds out she's going to hell because she committed suicide. And but otherwise, she has a totally clean record and died a virgin. So the guy sends her, basically allows her to return. It's not totally clear to Earth or wherever, so that she can have a bunch of sexual adventures before she has to go to hell anyways. Yeah, she wants lust. And from that point on, it's basically a scene after scene after scene after scene of different sex scenes. We've got, just her with a guy, her with a girl, her by herself, her with a girl and a guy, her with two guys, her with a snake and some fruit. And so what were you going to say about the snake scene, which I was not, that made me uncomfortable.
Oh, well, yeah, absolutely. That was the one improvised scene in the film. Despite Gerard Damiano's insistence that everything be, right to the letter, apparently the snake belonged to Marc Stevens, who, besides being the person who brought Georgina Spelvin to the set, he was also just an outrageous character. He basically wanted to be the first porn superstar. He wrote 2 memoirs in the 70s, so that kind of, makes you wonder, did he really deserve that? But he was a fascinating figure. He wanted to just be as wild and outlandish as possible. And so, long story short, he had a pet snake named Herman. And for whatever reason, he felt like he needed to bring the snake to Pennsylvania when they shot all of the scenes in that, whether it's Earth or whatever it is, all of those scenes were in Pennsylvania. He brought the snake with him, and Georgina Spelvin was just, petting the snake at one point while, people were setting up in between scenes, and Damiano saw it and thought, oh, amazing. We've got to start doing something with this. This is going to be amazing cinema. Whether or not that's true, I guess we can decide for ourselves. But everyone thought it fit in with this, I don't know, like a Garden of Eden idea. It's the serpent. It, is part of her descent into sin, I guess. Maybe.
Yeah,
kind of
why not?
debatable.
Yeah, she kind of it puts its head like in her mouth, and
yeah, not great. Really,
I was glad it didn't go further than that, though.
Yeah.
Also, it looks like we lost.
Monitoring. Yeah.
No, the Humane Society was not on set for this, probably.
I feel bad I didn't bring my copy of one of Marc Stevens' memoirs. That would have been really great just to hold up for the
Oh, yeah.
I mean, the idea that, someone would want to write a memoir about the incredible porn industry while it was happening in the 70s. I mean, it hadn't been around for that long. So, I mean, the bulk of what he's writing about is like just his home life and growing up in Brooklyn, which that's another fascinating thing. So many people from New York in these films, which as a New Yorker, I love.
So yeah, in general, there's, I would say like what we described through the opening, through the suicide is like the first 9 minutes of the movie. And the next like 5 minutes is her being interviewed and, finding out she's going to hell and everything, which is a scene I think looks a little cheaper with a little shakier acting, at least with the guy that she's talking to.
I love that hazy 70s sun, though. I'm just a slut.
Sure. And And then from that point on, I mean, my impression is that the whole rest of the movie is just scenario after scenario without really any context. So it's like we just, crossfade into her with this guy who calls himself the teacher, and them having sex for a very long time. And then her with just crossfades
she's got to learn.
Girls rubbing lotion on each other. And
I love that. I bet it's just like glistening, like crazy looking scene. Again, the haze, the 70s haze in this movie, at least on the version that I watched, I just really loved.
Yeah, I think that's how it always looks, no matter what you're watching, because I think the film is in the public domain, so nobody has ever really been able to restore it. It just kind of looks like what it looks like. But
Ex-hamster or not.
Well, yeah. But also, I think that Damiano didn't really... I don't think he designed to the look of the film. He kind of left it up to the cinematographer, who is also another really interesting figure in just like general film history, João Fernandes, who worked in a lot of adult films in the 70s and then went on to do Friday the 13th, The Final Chapter.
Yeah,
and Children of the Corn.
I read that film. I knew films I know very well in my horror watching childhood.
Functional
and
art.
My personal favorite, The Prowler, which just an amazing movie. But he was basically responsible for all of the lighting and framing, so it's not really clear to me if Damiano had any ideas about anything more than just like pointing and shooting the camera. But yeah, I mean, I think that natural light kind of look is, part of what makes the film, I don't know if you want to say special, but it's memorable for sure.
Yeah, I like how it's all sort of stream of consciousness, almost the way the sex scenes and everything are edited together, and they flow in this dreamy sort of way. Some of them like sort of repeat or bookend too at certain points, because it is just, she's like wandering in and out of one or the other sexual encounter or sexual experiment. And I think it only adds to the dream nature of the whole thing. I really enjoy that about this one.
And I think there's a comfort in particular in that glistening scene with Claire Lumiere. I don't remember what her real name was.
Wow.
But that scene, she was actually Georgina Spelvin's roommate. And they were in a relationship at the time, so that's how she got the job on the film. I think she was also supposed to do craft services, which was $25 a day. But when she was told that she could be in this scene, then that was $100. So she said, sure, why not? I mean, they were already comfortable with each other, and I think that adds to the feeling of that whole scene, besides the music, which also, creates a lot of that mood. But just knowing that those two performers were already intimately involved and had that emotional connection, I think makes it work even better.
And man, look at the craft service industry just turning out porn stars.
Yeah,
I wonder.
That's your way up.
Yeah.
I mean, not for nothing, there were a lot of people who worked in adult film at the time who had drama degrees from colleges. They studied acting. They really wanted to be legitimate, quote unquote, actors. So yeah, craft services or theater or both.
Sure.
And
yeah, I think, the thing I guess the most I got out of those scenes is that they do kind of like pick a different kind of music and tone for each one. And there's one scene in particular, it's just her masturbating in a bathtub and with a water hose. And there's these just like mournful horns and electric guitar that I swear sounds just like the Once Upon a Time in the West soundtrack.
Yes,
which is one of my favorite all-time soundtracks. Yeah, it's just weird to hear that over what we're seeing. It does add a atmosphere to it that you wouldn't normally get.
Yeah, there's like a weird ennui, like almost not depressive, but a somber sort of melancholy to some of it. That's interesting.
Well, I think Damiano wanted to use even more recognizable music than that to reel audiences in, because another thing that I heard him speak about on the DVD was that he edited that suicide scene at the beginning to Bridge Over Troubled Water.
Whoa.
So
oh my God.
He wanted that in the film. He really thought that would make it.
That'd be
specifically
badass.
Roberta Flack's version of it. He couldn't afford it. So I'm sure that the fact that that other piece sounds so exactly like Morricone was intentional.
Yeah,
I think
for
he
sure.
really wanted that specific atmosphere.
Yeah. Yeah, the music does mean a lot. There's a lot of yearning that comes out of it. There is a desperation, and the scenes get more and more like intense and desperate, because you do feel like maybe in the background, in the back of her head, she is remembering that she only has a short time in this world of lust before she goes to hell, and she can see the light at the end of the tunnel, or then it's fire at the end of the tunnel, I guess. Well, no, not really. It's a man in a cell who talks to a fly. But before that, you see some stuff that you would be surprised to even find now in 2022 on your regular Pornhub search. Wow, the snake scene, just her sort of like, she has a snake and she's just like kind of popping it in her mouth every once in a while, and it's just like this long take of her like kissing it and licking it, and they're like sort of dancing together, like her tongue and a snake. And I can't, I don't know if the snake should be there or not.
No, definitely not.
Probably not, no. But I've never seen a scene like that before. It's extremely strange.
I think it's just all part of wanting to push boundaries.
Yes.
Just, like, do whatever you think will shock viewers and get the critics a buzz.
Yeah.
And there were critics writing about these in the newspapers. So
I have Roger Ebert's positive 3-star review of this pulled up right now. And that was another reason I was very interested in this, because he didn't like Deep Throat, but he gave this a review, which, I mean, it is a little measured. He's mainly holding it to the standard of other hardcore films at the time, and was just impressed with the performance and how it didn't seem totally exploitative and grim and basic. But he was a fan, and I have to say, personally, I was disappointed that once the sex scenes start, they're never really situated back into a story or anything. It as they went on and on and on, I was starting to feel like all that we really got cinematically was this opening, and then it ends up just being an excuse to get to scene after scene after scene. And I did get a little restless as it started going on, especially since, I think there's more dynamically shot sex scenes in the other movies than these in general. And, maybe it's just a personal thing too, that again, this is a hardcore movie. So we're talking like extreme close-ups of, just genitals slapping together. It's very anatomical. And for me, that kind of just like explicitness is not really erotic. And it's more like I'm going to medical school or something when they have such a focus on that. And so that's why I was not as taken with this as Seth was, but I was by the first 9 minutes at least.
Different strokes.
Oh, Jesus.
Well,
Nice one.
Damiano seemed to think that his greatest skill as a filmmaker was his editing. And I would argue that there are a lot of scenes in Devil that just go on forever. I mean, they should have been edited more. I mean, shots don't necessarily have to last that long. So, for sure, compared to the other two films, this one, it's a little rudimentary. It definitely could have used more plot, could have used a little more, I don't know, verve in some department. It definitely is not as good as Damiano eventually became with some later films. So it's hard for me to kind of divorce my knowledge of what he later did with, enjoying this film for what it is. And there are some ways to enjoy it for sure, just like, from a historical perspective. But you're right, some of those scenes, perfunctory.
Yeah, and they go a little long. I think I might have just been in the mood. Who knows? But I don't know. I guess the lack of plot is what I appreciate. The lack of plot, along with the plot that is there, just being so surreal and strange, and it just like almost like I don't need more like breaks in the action, because it just frames all the situations with this weird scenario of everything being in purgatory. And like I'm wondering, like, where is this in a part of a castle of purgatory? Like, I wonder like where these rooms are located and things like that. And I don't know. Yeah, I like the lack of humor in this one comparative. I don't know. There, at least in regards to, I think I have maybe a different kind of fun with uh Misty Beethoven or something, or a lot of other pornos that like play up the humorous aspects. That is more like I could actually sit down and watch this with friends, and it would be like a funny like experience and stuff, because it's more of that kind of sexual, like, look into sexuality, like someone's like pointing, and like, I don't know, but that was kind of gets in the way of me enjoying it on an erotic level, I feel like, which this one didn't have. That it doesn't have that need to constantly poke fun and remind you of like how silly it is and how silly you look when you have sex and stuff like that, where this seemed more just like committed and going for it, I guess. That's what I appreciate, I guess.
Well, there was definitely a lot more effort put into this film than had been previously seen in most theatrically released adult films, because those were usually called weekend wonders or one-day wonders. There was really no energy put into them at all. You just do it in one day. That's it. Everything improvised. Never heard of a screenplay. So, the idea that there was more effort put into this, there was a sense that a film was being made, and more than just I think a lot of the one day wonders were goofy. They're silly. So yeah, this one has real dramatic intent.
Yeah,
it's intentional.
Yeah, it's less afraid to like fall on its face, and it does. But it seems less preoccupied with that being like on their minds or something. They're just kind of going for it. Yeah.
I think that makes this a good introduction to this kind of movie too, because it does split the difference a bit, as far as you can tell the difference it's making by subtly adding in these other elements that weren't there with just run-of-the-mill pornos before. But that also means, I think,
grape fucking representation. There's just not enough having sex with grapes in porn, and this movie has that.
And of course, she's got to eat them afterwards.
Oh yeah,
you should have heard me go, oh.
There's bananas going inside her.
Yeah,
and she eats the banana.
That's art,
man. The commitment,
You can't be half-hearted when you do those kinds of scenes. You just have to, do as much as humanly possible.
Whatever it takes to get people to eat their fruits and vegetables,
Exactly.
Hey, you can have your own purgatory dream, okay? This is mine.
Yeah, but I think that's the tendency, at least with this particular movie, is to kind of grade it on a curve. That was the idea that I got from the Ebert review. That was like, oh, look how much closer this is inching towards being an actual movie. And I guess it just depends how much that particular aspect means to you, as opposed to if it maybe it doesn't get there all the way, but it's in comparison to other porn, I think, is where this really shines.
Yeah, it just felt like an arty movie with a lot of sex in it, kind of.
Yeah, a whole lot. So, and again, the ending, which is spoiled by the beginning, I guess, but that is really the main point of interest, where she's finally like, all right, I guess I'm ready to go to hell now. And it ends up being her alone in this cell with some guy who she desperately is trying to get to touch her and has no interest. He just wants to talk about a fly that comes out when he closes his eyes, like mad ramblings. And I guess that's supposed to be her hell now, is that she wants sex and this guy won't give it to her.
I love it. He's just like, yeah, and is it he needs to like quiet her down or something? He's like, quiet down, and she's just like masturbating herself, and she's just like, please come on, and he's just like, please be quiet, I'm trying to find this fly.
Yeah, not even any fruit or snakes, so even on her own she's out of luck.
Well, everyone has their own private hell, because in Damiano's view, there are 33 flavors of Baskin Robbins. So for as many different flavors of ice cream as there are as, many, well, infinitely more possibilities for the kinds of hells that you could be stuck in. And in particular for me, I think of that line in Psycho about everyone being stuck in their own private traps and no one can get out. So, it just is what it is in the end.
Yeah, and that's the most no exit thing about this, I guess. But so we do like to ask at the end of each discussion for each film is if you would unwatch it if you could. So Jetta, if we want to start with you, and go ahead.
I would definitely watch it again. I've seen it before. May possibly see it again if I feel like I could get something else out of it. I will say, because I forgot to mention this earlier, one of the absolute funniest things to me is that Damiano did not have a share in the profits. So he didn't see really any money from the extraordinary success of it because he just didn't think to. He didn't think to ask. Like, he just got paid right up front from the producers, I guess, and went on his merry way. But then when the movie made $15 million, then he had to get lawyers, and he ended up getting $100,000, but then he had to pay $50,000 to the lawyers, so he didn't get anything else really out of that besides that. So I guess I would rewatch the film thinking about the fact that Gerard Damiano is, well, he was for decades still mad about that. That was kind of like the overwhelming feeling he had about it. And I don't know, that's just fascinating thinking about how, for decades afterward, he was just mad about that. He couldn't get the success he thought he deserved out of it.
Man, I feel like most of that money should have gone to the craft services because they got their money's worth from that.
True.
All right, and Seth.
Yeah, like I said, I liked this one quite a bit, again, for its earnestness and it just being kind of just weird. It's just a real oddity and it's real sexy, so I'm gonna be kind of into that. Yeah, I don't know. I would watch it again, maybe even soon. Who knows though? Might be like a second date that just is not like the first one. So we'll see. We'll see how it goes.
Yeah, and I don't know. I was a little torn because I'm glad to finally be exploring this scene, and again, it has a striking opening. But I guess just like statistically, most of it I was not really wanting to watch. So maybe just in the most of the percentage of this film, I would probably be happy to unwatch. But that takes us to our next film, which is the Opening of Misty Beethoven, which I honestly can't imagine that there would be like a better argument for this genre. And I was surprised by just how much of a blast I had with this movie. And I am so glad that we included it because we got a full out comedy, freewheeling 70s comedy full of hardcore sex. And, we got a higher budget, I think stronger acting and material and visual sense to it. And I am a fan of Misty Beethoven.
It's witty. It's silly. Love it.
I mean, it's international. It's globe hopping.
Yeah.
How could you do better than that?
We got New York, Paris, Rome. It feels like this must have had a bigger budget than the other ones that we watched.
Was it not the biggest at the time? Yeah.
Well, I don't know how much it cost, but Metzger, I think, when he was asked about it, said he couldn't remember how much it cost. So that'll give you some idea. No expense spared.
Yeah, I actually did look into this ahead of time and had a hard time finding like concrete, like kind of like Marc was saying with at least with The Devil and Miss Jones.
Loose accounting.
But, yeah. Let's see if we can find the budget.
Untrustworthy.
For this one.
And I think just in general, while Tony's looking for that, just the fact that the sex in here is just more just joyous and lighthearted and even funny. which I just really liked. Sometimes a lot of times it functions as a punchline, or it's there for just the pure absurdity of it, where they're walking around a mansion and there's just always a maid blowing a servant somewhere in the background.
Eternal head. There's just so much head being given in this movie.
Well, service.
Yes.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. And basically, this is a Pygmalion My Fair Lady story, where a sexologist, Dr. Seymour Love, meets this kind of low rent sex worker who's not very good at her job, and he wants to turn her into this sex goddess, and takes her to this like sex school, and gives her these challenges of seducing different people, and it just goes from there. And I feel like this has more in common with a movie like Airplane or like a Zucker's Brothers type movie.
And quite literally, at certain points, they had that airplane set that they're on. That is like a real airplane set that they're in. And it's like a sex airplane where the stewardesses come around and they're like, what would you like? And you're allowed to just like ask for head or like ask to put something in her ass or something like that.
Excuse me.
It was a real airplane. Yeah. They actually were able to get one, but they had to lie about what they were doing.
It's so wild. Yeah, there's like full on like sex and stuff going on. Lovely.
That contains one of the funniest jokes in the movie to me, which is when she comes over and says, "Would anybody like to fuck a stewardess?" And then however that scene winds up, the guy pulls out a cigar holder and hands it to her, and she just dutifully bends over and puts it in her butt and then walks away. And the woman sitting next to the guy on the plane says, like, why'd she do that? And he says, oh, that's a Jamaican cigar. She smuggles them across the customs line for me. And then the woman goes, but wait, it's not illegal to import Jamaican cigars. And the guy goes, shh. That's pretty good.
It's such a good scene.
Gotta love
a lot of my favorite stuff is on the plane. Everything on the plane is gold. Like as soon as we cut to it, stewardess is done servicing a passenger and just gets up and is like, all right, now who gets the vodka? And keeps giving out drinks.
I want a sequel, Sex Plane.
Yeah.
And the fact that Marc Margolis is there, who became an actually well-known character actor, the guy who's mad that he didn't get 2 blowjobs. Just like seeing him, it's always fascinating when every now and then you'll see someone who actually got a mainstream career. They'll just pop up in one of these movies because it was the beginning of their, long and storied career.
Yeah, didn't Sylvester Stallone start out in a porno?
He did, and it is unbelievably bad. So bad. Like, you should watch it because it's so bad. The Party at Kitty and Studs.
All right.
Oh my God. I mean, yeah, horrible.
Italian Stallion.
Yeah, for sure. And
what's the guy's name who's like the sexologist? Seymour?
Jamie Gillis.
Yeah, he reminded me of like Elliot Gould or something.
Oh yeah.
And,
yes.
Yeah, he's pretty much like, he has some sex. He definitely has some sex, but he just is constantly, he's like really into blowjobs. It seems to be his thing. He's just like, it always has some lady giving him head everywhere he goes, and he's just like walking and talking, but somebody's giving him head at all times. I just love that.
Jamie Gillis.
Kind of unavoidable in these movies. That's just part of it.
Jamie Gillis as the sexologist gives my favorite performance in all 3 of these movies, honestly. Because I didn't he doesn't start having sex, I think, with people for a little bit into the movie. And you're right, he totally reminded me of like Dustin Hoffman or Elliot Gould. And he has this really funny way of delivering lines and being this hoity-toity guy. And I think this is actually a really good comic performance. I was almost disappointed at a certain point when he started just participating in the sex scenes. I was like, I was enjoying you more, like being funny.
Got a nice dick too.
And apparently,
lots of those.
And apparently, may I say, he was so proud of his work in this film that when he won an acting award for it, I guess from whatever Adult Film Association of America kind of ceremony existed at the time, he kept it on his mantle at home. He wanted everyone to see it. He wanted everyone to know he was so proud of his performance in this.
He did great.
So, there you go.
Yeah, he was wonderful, and I think everybody is pretty good. I think he shines the most.
I do like Misty
throughout the
Beethoven.
movie.
She's lovely. She does a great job. She is funny. I love her in the montage, the opening montage of them just like showing her how to do everything in this weird like what feels like a porn castle or something. Like her like
Sex training
practicing
montage
on these like rainbow like dildo things and popsicles and all kinds of stuff. And she's just so just like I don't know, just wandering into this weird world.
Yeah, and I want to spotlight the editing in this movie because it has this it's so snappy and has this playful rhythm all throughout. From the very first scene, which is Dr. Love just strolling past the sex shops in downtown Paris and intercut with this sex scene that we aren't sure like where it's happening, and he eventually wanders into a porn theater, and it turns out that's what's showing on screen. And right from that part, we have this funny juxtaposition, and then this old guy walks in and like reveals that he's in a Napoleon costume, and right from that moment I was like, oh, this is fun. She's like, excuse me, I have to go give Napoleon a hand job, which is then intercut with a guy getting a hand job in the movie.
And there's even a match cut to something happening on screen.
Like, yeah, sure is.
Yeah. Incredible.
Yeah, I couldn't believe the editing. It was so startling to see it in a porno. Like, it's all these like parallel action going on and like one thing happening, cutting back to another thing. It's just really wild. You don't get to see that a lot. And it's really effective also for the eroticism because you're getting like multi layers of stimulation, lots going on all at once. So that's also a benefit.
And Misty also wears that incredible t-shirt with the credit cards on it to highlight the transactional nature of her work.
Yes.
Love that.
Oh, yeah.
Love it, Misty. Own it.
Yeah, and then just the script itself is just so sharp and has all of these great one-liners in it. I mean, probably the one that people quote the most is something that like Woody Allen could have written, like in his prime, basically when they're landing in Rome, and she's like, "What's the difference between New York and Rome?" And he's like, "There aren't as many Italians in Rome."
Mm-hmm.
And I'm like, that's an A+ joke.
Knee slapper.
No sex at all. And yeah, it's just full of stuff like this. This is Geraldine Rich. She's very Geraldine and very rich. And it's just, I think he wrote a book called The Annals of Passion.
Mm-hmm.
In his expertise.
Oh.
Yeah, and
she seduces a gay guy at one of her challenges. That's pretty that's a wild little scene.
Another fascinating thing, because Casey Donovan was one of the most famous figures in the gay film world at that time. For having been in Boys in the Sand by Wakefield Poole, he was like one of the faces of gay porn at the time. And so the idea that he would be in this, he knew Radley Metzger from having been in the earlier film Score, but just the idea that he would want to be in this, and I mean, I don't know. Why did he? That's a good question. But
even he.
I love the eyeshadow.
Amazing.
It's like it's a mad world of porn.
I was gonna say
everyone
that,
popping up.
Yeah, even this guy, seduced by Misty, it just really hammers it all home that she is the sex goddess by the end. Who can say no?
Yeah, and I believe it's with him too that they like she basically practices giving him oral sex by giving oral sex to a woman in a scene before that, and she's following these instructions like on an earpiece. It's basically like Cyrano de Bergerac with porn, or Roxanne.
Kind of a bit of a spy movie thing going on, that whole like, infiltrating his place and seeing what's happening there, all of the stuff with Terry Hall guiding her along. I don't know, there's a kind of an espionage sort of a feel to it, I think. Getting intel.
Yeah, there's secrets going on. It's a secret world, a secret sex world, and I kind of love that about this one.
Yeah, and there's also a funny scene with a guy who like is with her at the opera, and he's known for like whenever he's ready to go, he's got to go get off as soon as possible. So they're like getting up and making people stand up and trying to get out of the row of seats. But then also, if he doesn't get to it soon enough, he loses interest. So then they turn back around or making everyone stand up again to go sit down.
And he's like, "Oh, I'm hard again. Let's go." And like, "Oh no, I got soft again. No, I gotta go sit down."
Yeah, and there's a scene that's not very funny, but it's when she eventually seduces this guy and his right-hand woman, and they have a threesome like near the end. And I don't know, was this the first like big porno movie with pegging in it, where she straps on and
At
has her
least
way
the
with him?
second. There was one before it.
Oh,
So, there you go, trivia.
All
Don't know when you'll
right.
need to use it, but there
second.
you go.
Yeah, I mean it's really a big modern move to have your climactic sex scene involve pegging. It's a wild scene. Well,
Actually,
there's
I
like
think
a threesome too happening at the same time when she has the thing on and fucking him. It's intense.
And I think that was the purpose, really, of Casey Donovan being in the film, because he had to double for the actor who was in that scene, who refused to do anything more than the straight sex.
I
So,
figured that was what was going on. It's like, all right, but
yeah.
I better be fucking some lady if I'm gonna get that up my ass.
hmm
Tony heard pegging and popped right up. He's our resident expert.
I had to... No, I was just gonna say that I was, Nat, you got to look for the thematic links between these between movies on all these episodes, right? But yeah, I did think it was interesting how like these. Well, this one's a comedy, so I guess it's a different arc than The Devil and Miss Jones. But as they kind of progress, like you got to do something to escalate the the on-screen stakes, and even with like the snake and the banana stuff, the threesome was like where that one ended, right? I don't think there was anything after that. And that one, even for all for as graphic as it is up until then, there's like I don't want to be too graphic on the podcast. There's a let's say that there's a like Lady and the Tramp spaghetti moment in that threesome. And I thought that was like, okay, this is like they couldn't think of anywhere to go. This is the highest height they could reach. And I was like, when the threesome started in the opening of Misty Beethoven, I was wondering, like, I don't know. I think threesome to threesome, like, I don't know if this one can match that, but it definitely did. The pegging scene did surprise it did the thing that it must have been doing to audiences at the time for me rapidly like speed running, big budget mainstream porn. It shocked me even having just watched this other one.
Yes.
They teach that in screenwriting classes. That's structure.
Yeah.
I gotta say,
Yeah, so
I love the bushes in these movies. And just when you really get these close-ups of just mashing genitals together, you really do see how things have changed in porn filmmaking. Things are lit in such different ways, and I don't know, like everybody's just groomed in such a different way now, it feels like, in like your average like model Pornhub clip that you would watch. This is just so much more just like, I don't know, like visceral to watch. These kind of sex scenes are so real looking in comparison.
I think I read that like 60% of the production budget for these movies went to pubic hair.
Yeah. It feels more naughty,
It's very 70s in that way. Yeah, lots of body hair in these movies, and nobody is like covered in tattoos like you would see a lot in
and it's not always about being the most like flattering. It is kind of just like, this is what's going on, we're doing it,
And I think a lot of the men who worked in these films, they often kind of felt like they were just furniture. They were really just there to support the women who presumably the audiences wanted to see more. So I don't know. It's always kind of interesting to me to try to judge. Well, I mean, there were attractive men in there too, and so what did the audience think? And were the men really just kind of invisible except for the sex purpose? I mean, I'm sure there had to be somebody in the audience who felt like the men were worth watching too. And I think that there's something just, as you say, really interesting about, yeah, how real everyone looks. And I mean, that's kind of what makes, I think, the 70s adult film era so special. I mean, it's before our conception of what porn is now. You know, the way that bodies are presumably supposed to look in those films.
Mm-hmm.
I feel there are very different standards for the men and women in these movies, because there are some good looking guys, but they also, it's pretty much open season for, they can bring in some like kind of not conventionally attractive, kind of pudgy guy with a big mustache who will come in, in the way that like Ron Jeremy became a porn star. And it's just not the kind of thing that you really see today, but the women tend to have more of a conventional like attractiveness about them.
Yeah, it
And
was more who
guys
was
are like, we're just
around.
here to party.
Yeah, more who was around, who
Yeah.
was willing to do this wild kind of work at the time, where now I'm sure you can just hop on the internet and like have all kinds of people talking to you and just kind of like borderline almost like Tinder rules, just like if you're a filmmaker, just like looking through to just the right kind of looking girl that you want with the right kind of guy that you want and fly them up here and do the scene and then it happens, where
There
this
was
is,
at
yeah, a
least
much different situation.
one element of just whoever's around for the women, at least in The Devil and Miss Jones. I think I read that the woman in the threesome at the end was actually not an actress and was working on set, I think in craft services, and they were just like, "Hey, you want to make $100?" And she just was there that day and ended up being in like the big final scene.
My God, yet again. I gotta get into craft services.
Well, I think it's also worth noting that Jamie Gillis was a real superstar at the time. Apparently, when he was in Rome for those scenes in Misty Beethoven, there was a moment when he was supposed to be on set, and Metzger couldn't start filming because Gillis was surrounded by people just like flocking to him in the street because they recognized him from all the other movies he'd made up until that point, and they wanted his autograph. So, clearly he had some appeal.
That makes sense because he's, the rare full package, if you will, that can actually act and be funny and charming and, is a good looking guy. And he can definitely perform in those scenes, where he has to have sex. So it's pretty much everything you could ask for from an adult film star. And yeah, so I definitely enjoyed this a lot and thought that it has the most story and like arc of all of the movies.
I love the arc in this, yeah, when
Mhm.
there's the end where she becomes sort of even over Mr. Seymour, right? She kind of turns her back on him and has kind of gone beyond him. I kind of love that moment. What is the line that she says? Is like, why would I need he says like, why won't you come and sleep with Caesar? And she's like, why would I sleep with Caesar when I have Napoleon or something, which is her
Yeah.
big slap it on the table kind of line, and she leaves or something, which I also am like, I think I understand what she meant, but also maybe I don't. But at the same time, I get it, Misty. Yes, great line.
Yeah, and really the only thing that stopped me from liking this more is that it does, like, I don't know, after like the 35-minute mark, it does start to have more just extended regular sex scenes where there's nothing funny happening. They're definitely better filmed, I think, than in The Devil and Miss Jones, but it does start to feel a little like it is checking off the boxes to make sure they're getting the long sex scenes in. And honestly, it had me thinking about Marvel movies, and follow me here, but every once in a while a Marvel movie comes out where there's, they have a good director and they have this kind of slant on it, and it's always like the first 45 minutes or so that is like, oh man, this is really funny or stylish, or you can kind of see their imprint. And then it gets to a point where they got to start throwing in, all of the plot stuff. They've got to have the big CGI fight scenes that take over the whole like last act, and they're just, spraying the colors and light beams at each other. And maybe that's kind of the same thing with some of these hardcore films where eventually they do need to kind of fulfill their contract where they have to make sure there's at least like, 3 or 4 or 5 just long graphic sex scenes that aren't necessarily doing much for the story or being funny or anything. And I did feel like those started to stack up a little bit as this goes on. So that would be my main criticism, really. And that even though this doesn't break 90 minutes, still a little too long, or at least feels that way because of that. I don't know. I would love for all of these porno movies to be like, just like around an hour or a little under length.
So The Devil
maybe.
and Miss Jones, basically.
Yeah, pretty much. If that had
that.
more going on during those parts, but yeah, that was my main thing. And I would still rather watch one of these than a Marvel movie. So
sure,
yeah, definitely.
Yeah.
Well, I mean, that is the toss-up, though, for me with this one. Again, in comparison to Devil and Miss Jones, it is. I get what you're saying. It is getting to that point where it just needs to like do its function, but that is like a big part of the movie, and that is like I can't fault it for that. I guess it is like it's getting down to the line. It's time to make people come, or at least, or probably at this point, come again, in a bigger way. And it's probably, more difficult, and they got to up the stakes at this point, get a little bit more serious. Again, I think I like this movie more as a movie, I guess, and that is the toss up. But for it being erotic to me, the jokes do get kind of in the way. The real movie aspect of it kind of gets in the way of it maybe being more of a sexy movie to me, I guess. I go back and forth about that.
I guess it's just like comedy in general. It's subjective, and not everyone's porn set piece is going to be as erotic. Maybe, some people are turned on by the flippantness and the funniness of things, and then other people, it kind of shuts them off.
Well, yeah.
Well, it's so beautifully photographed. I feel like you could, even in moments where it seems like, maybe the editing should be a little better, it's just so gorgeously lit and it's so beautifully photographed. You could just focus on the images and that would be impressive.
It's all candy.
And I mean, worth noting also another case of the cinematographer really being in charge of everything as far as, how it would be lit and how everything would be set up. And Paul Glickman, another guy who went on to work in mainstream movies, or at least B movies, because he also did a lot of things with Larry Cohen, like God Told Me To and The Stuff. So interesting also to think about this cinematographer having such a strong sensibility and, creating imagery that I think is part of what makes the film so just continually entertaining.
All right, yeah. So I'm definitely not unwatching this. This is actually the one I can imagine returning to or watching with other people.
Yeah, it could be a good party movie, actually.
Yeah. So three thumbs up for this one. 3 watches.
Oh,
I
yeah.
think so.
Okay. Cool. And I think this makes for a really great contrast then with our final movie, which was from 1979. We're kind of closing in towards the end of this era. And this is called Her Name Was Lisa, which is totally diametrically opposed to this movie.
Oh, yeah.
And reading about it, it made me, interested in it for that reason. So right now we're dealing with Roger Watkins, credited, I guess, as Richard Mahler when this movie first came out. Richard
Mahler, because what could be more pretentious than, Richard Wagner and Gustav Mahler, incredible composers. So, of course, that's where this would come from.
Yes, although of course he's Dick Mahler.
Sure.
So
it's all music to my ears.
Yeah, and I haven't seen any of his other movies, but I have read about The Last House on Dead End Street that he did a few years before, which is like a horror movie, right?
Yeah, I mean, some people think it's a masterpiece. I found it incredibly boring. So, who knows?
I'm very curious.
It was made for $800, so, you know.
That's how it should be, man. 800 gets
Well,
you a
I mean,
lot.
the adult films he made, which he didn't seem to care for, and he was embarrassed that he had to make them to support his family, those look fantastic, and they're so superior. I don't know, just fascinating what has ended up being his legacy. So,
Right. Well, and this one is pretty grim too. It basically centers around a framing device where the titular Lisa is already dead. We see her corpse right away, and she spends the movie in a casket with different characters coming to visit her, and they each kind of have a flashback telling the story of how she got there. And
it's immediately somber,
yeah,
immediately a bummer, kind of.
Although you do see her naked corpse at first, because we got to check off that box,
which is a cool shot.
Yeah,
it's like feels like a Dario Argento lo-fi version shot.
Yeah, and so basically we go one flashback at a time here. So I guess that's kind of how we can approach this. But it starts with this photographer who meets Lisa in like a brothel and invites her to take nude pictures of her because he sees something special in her. And
he's the worst actor I have ever seen in a movie.
I was gonna say,
reading cue cards.
Like every time they cut back to him, I feel like we're in like a different movie or something, or like he's just in a different scene in a different room. Like he's just so monotone. It's nuts.
Yeah, it's a true.
He looks like the eldest son from the Brady Bunch, which I find just so disturbing.
That boy would grow up better.
Yeah, I found him to be one of the best looking guys in these movies. And at the same time, he gives like the most wooden, just porn performance that you could have ever seen. And
oh my God.
Just seeing Samantha Fox as Lisa like act opposite him. And it's like they're in different movies, like where she's trying to be naturalistic and just have a conversation. And he is just, well, how am I supposed to feel? And
yeah.
And he's supposed to have this like kind of, I don't know, like a little bit of a power dynamic going on, and you just don't buy it at all. Like him as like this, like, I am a photographer, I am holding the camera now kind of thing. There's just not even an ounce of eros to be found or any sort of power in that guy. It's weird.
Yeah, and of course her audition for him ends up being a long sex scene between the two of them. Although before that is one of my favorite parts, though. It's very brief, but when we first see him doing this like photo shoot with these other women, and they're like, one of them's like holding a gun against the other's head, and they're like smearing blood all over themselves, and it's set to a Kraftwerk song.
Yeah.
Yes.
Which
I could
blew
not
my mind.
believe it. It took me so long. It was like, man, the soundtrack is slapping. Who is this no-name artist who died in poverty, like made porn music? I need to find them. And all of a sudden, it's We Are the Robots.
Yes.
Oh my God, I couldn't believe it.
I don't know how did Watkins afford the soundtrack of this film?
Yeah, Led Zeppelin is in here too.
I lost my mind when this is skipping way to the end, and all of a
Dazed
sudden,
and confused.
After all these stories of like decades of how nobody could afford Led Zeppelin music, like to clear it for their movies, until they finally started letting them use original recordings, I just figured there's no way they got the rights to this stuff. They must have just put it in. But
isn't that like a big thing? I watched that in like the School of Rock special features where they had to do like a whole video like that they sent like asking Jimmy Page if they could use the immigrant song in School of Rock, and it's like all these kids like, please, Mr. Jimmy Page, and like this porno just gets to have like it's really uncomfortable like climactic scene to Dazed and Confused. Just there you go.
And it's not even the first adult film that used it. There was actually one before it. I'm pretty sure it's used in Bijou by Wakefield Poole. So there you go. These directors, they had something going there.
Was this some mafia stuff here where like
could be.
They had to they better, or whatever, label executive owned these recordings was blackmailed or something?
Maybe so.
So yeah, that's weird. But anyways, those those two sequences, and we'll talk about the Days of Confused sequence later, I think for me were really the only things that stood out that much to me cinematically. But otherwise, and maybe you guys disagree, but eventually the photographer is kind of forced to introduce her to this rich magazine publisher who again has a long sex scene with her.
That whole scene's really funny. He really like butts his way in and he's like, all right, son, go get us a sandwich or something. And yes, you'll be gone for a half hour. That's fine. And then like we know what's going to happen. And the photographer leaves. And yeah, the guy has this really silly like mustache. I kind of like him. He's very striking. Kind of has a weird way of delivering his lines.
He has a Ron Jeremy air to him.
He's very flat. Yes, very matter of fact. Very matter of fact.
It's kind of mesmerizing the way he just sort of, swoons and trips through those lines. I don't know what he thought he was doing, but it's very entertaining.
It almost
especially in comparison to the photographer too. It's like, hey, somebody who can read lines is here.
That might be part of it.
The air in the room changes when he shows
for sure.
Yeah, it's nuts.
And he's in a lot of the movie. He's like a main character from that point.
I figured she would climb to like, okay, next one, but it does kind of, I expected it to go a lot more places, and maybe it was because I watched it after Misty Beethoven, which is just like a mile a minute, just like so much happening. Where this one just kind of has like a few set pieces, really.
Yeah, she moves in with this guy. There's another long like BDSM sex scene between them where she finds some leather dominatrix gear, straps him down to the bed.
Definitely for me, she's beautiful. I think she is pretty beautiful in this leathery gothy outfit. She did a great job
with that kind of purple lipstick.
Yeah, great
lighting
makeup
that lights her from below.
Oh
yeah,
best part.
And it is kind of weird how we never see the photographer again, because it seems like he feels some kind of betrayal when she goes off with him. And I'm not sure if we're meant to think that she had something more real going on with him, or if
I thought he would come back and ice the guy with the mustache or something.
Yeah.
But no.
He's gone forever. And go ahead.
Well, I don't think he could do anything more in the story. I mean, I guess he like did as much as he could. He offered as much as he could, and he's out. I mean, other people have bigger plans for her ultimately.
I feel like he could have made his performance make more sense if he did come back as like a psychopath and like, you kicked me out, and then he like, I don't know, kills the mustache guy. I think that I would have then his performance would make sense as a stilted like psychopath or something. But now he's just a guy who can't act in my head.
Yeah, it just seems like they're setting up a conflict that never gets followed through with. But she seems to be happy going with this guy, and then she meets Carmen, this other female character, at a spa, who will eventually become a more significant character. And then we get this scene where things go south, and she's given some kind of pills by the magazine guy, and potentially is a rape scene where two guys come over and unwillingly she is essentially assaulted by them. And I'm curious to get everybody's thoughts about this, because that is a really touchy topic of having a scene like that in a porn that's supposed to be erotic in general as a movie.
Mm-hmm.
And it seems to me like the scene is still filmed pretty much like all the other sex scenes, except there's some more like, leering shots of the guys' faces and some verbal protests from her. But this would be very easy for someone who would just get off on that kind of thing to enjoy. But I don't know. Maybe, do you think there's anything else going on there?
Oh, well, I feel like there are a lot of films from this era that eroticize any kind of sexual assault. They'll just find whatever excuse they can to turn the pain into pleasure and to make it into something that the woman really wants to have happen. And I feel like the film doesn't go there. It makes it pretty clear that she doesn't like what's happening. She is grimacing throughout, trying to, at points claw her way away from them, but of course it doesn't work. And I feel like that's important. just adding to that discomfort and the realization of what's really happening, and that there's just no enjoyment at all. Very important. In fact, getting back to Jamie Gillis, he was in a lot of films where he played sadists. A lot of films. That was kind of like his thing. Misty Beethoven is sort of an outlier compared to what he usually did. And so, thinking about all the films that he was in and other actors who made careers out of playing those kinds of characters, it's really uncomfortable. And yeah, it makes you wonder, what is the audience feeling? I mean, in 1979 or now, how are they sitting with this? How are they processing it when there's been all this other, presumably consensual content between the characters? So it's heavy.
Yeah, it's heavy. It rides the line for me because I like what you're saying. I think that is a important aspect of it, that there isn't what would be really awful about a scene like that is when you pose some sort of like point at the end where she's finally like, yes, I actually do like this, she like turns it around or something, and then reiterating these awful messages that some men believe, that like, oh well, no, they say they don't want it a certain way, but they do, or something like a horrible like message of some sort. That's not necessarily here. There is
the straw
still
dogs effect.
Yeah, there is still the eroticism of rape itself, that is like pretty intense. It, like Marc said, I agree that it does feel like it's shot like a normal sex scene, which is just like, it makes it a confusing thing to witness. I don't know. Yeah, it's a
Well,
lot.
I will say it also probably, for me at least, helped that I knew that one of the two actors playing the rapists was Samantha Fox's partner, Bobby Astor, aka the Clown Prince of Porn. So the fact that he was in a relationship with her, and maybe it also helps that I've seen him in other films where he is a hilarious and delightful character, so kind of softens my general image of him. But
Right.
just knowing that those two actors have this relationship, and that they're fully aware of what boundaries can't be crossed, because that's part of also the experience of watching these films, worrying and wondering, is everything okay when they're filming it? Are they really comfortable with what's happening? And so it makes it just a little bit easier knowing that the two actors were aware of what they could or could not do and what they were comfortable with, I think.
Right, consenting adults, and they're playing out a scene, which that's fine. Yeah, I hear that for sure.
Yeah, it's really just the fact that this is in a porno, that makes you think a little bit. But in real life, I mean, there are normal people who have sexual fantasies, about rape or being raped, even, and which doesn't mean they actually want to be in real life. That's just like a fantasy scenario that in a safe way they can play out while still realizing all of the real life implications of it. And so I don't know, if somebody does get excited by that scene, doesn't necessarily mean that they are a sex criminal or something.
Sure. Mm-hmm.
And in this text, things are pretty, artificial too. So maybe it even helps soften it that it's a porno, and we're not taking it quite as dramatically seriously as we might otherwise.
Yeah, with anything like this,
two
it all
sides
depends.
to everything.
Yeah, it could run into the wrong person, but I don't know if I would necessarily fault the filmmakers for that necessarily.
Well, just knowing that there were films, I mean, getting back to talking about Deep Throat and the controversy of what really happened with Linda Lovelace, just knowing that there were sets where people were doing things that they weren't actually comfortable with, but they just went along with it and they just hated it. And so, I mean, knowing, I guess, just for me, that there was that extra layer helps a little, makes it just a little bit less uneasy.
Yeah, I'm glad you illuminated that too.
Yeah, that is good to know. And then the next scene we get is her running into Carmen again in the spa, and she immediately has a sex scene with her, which I guess, you could look as being something that's a little healing, or her being with somebody that she was actually interested in.
Yeah, I kind of liked that. It was kind of sweet or something in this sort of way of it's like she finds solace with someone after a horrible event. Not that it's like a really well put together scene or anything or really deep necessarily, but I at least appreciated it.
And that scene has some of the closest close-ups I have ever seen in any kind of porn. Which
fingers going in those ladies' pussies, like I didn't even know what I was looking at for a while. Like
I have to admit,
close.
I did kind of use my peripheral vision with a lot of scenes in this and some of the other ones where it was just like, I don't need this anatomy lesson on this scale. Like every little bump, and I don't know.
Sure, again, there is like that element to all of these that is, it's not always like, not everything is constantly made to be like super flattering and like this super visual way that the internet has kind of made manifest, I feel like, with sex.
And those anatomical close-ups, which when you've seen enough of these films, you just unfortunately kind of get used to. It's just part of that feeling of the filmmakers trying to establish what's really real. You have to see everything. You have to know that there is just absolutely no way that it's been faked. So
that's a good point.
That feeling of seeing all the skin possible in that scene.
Right, and it's still being this novel thing where like an audience member is like, I really can't believe it. I'm seeing it. There it is, right on a big screen, and I'm here. Wow.
Yeah, that would be pretty mind-blowing. And then after that, they end up back and based at the guy's apartment, and that's basically where they together take revenge on him, which is another thing that shows that she wasn't, getting off on her sexual assault. And, it starts out as another long threesome sex scene, but ends with revenge pegging, which is very different from how it's portrayed as this very erotic,
right,
apex in Misty Beethoven, and here it's no help, and he does not like it.
I believe I wrote in my notes, instead of Chekhov's gun, it's Chekhov's dildo. You know something's going to happen.
Yeah.
Have to wait and see.
Yeah, and then he disappears. Like the next scene, she's living with the girl now, and I think the movie starts to become something even more different at that point.
Yeah, where it kind of speeds along a little bit over, kind of glosses over time, it feels like. Whereas, they're like living together slowly. She's turning Lisa onto heroin.
Yeah.
At some point. Yeah.
So she's no longer like this girlfriend or, love interest character or savior or something. She's going into this downward spiral where she becomes this strung out junkie and who needs her fix. And I think that's probably the place that gives her the most room to actually do some acting. I'm not sure that she gets much of an opportunity elsewhere, but she was convincingly, kind of like a strung out, junkie in those last scenes, at least.
She's an okay dom, though, I will say. She's a fine actress with her doming.
I think Samantha Fox actually did have a substance abuse problem in the late 70s. So I think the sense of, drug addiction seeming real was based on her own experience.
Whoa.
So that's part of it. I also feel like Carmen's kind of like an angel of death. That's the feeling I get from her. So even from the very first moment we meet her, there's something mysterious and enigmatic and a little dangerous about her, and it just, of course, gets worse and worse as the film progresses.
Yeah, it's interesting because it starts out as like this healing presence. She's a friend, and then she, sort of sets her free by ridding her of this master and things like that. And then there's sort of for me, I didn't see it coming necessarily. And I kind of, I appreciated it sort of as this like, oh shit, this is suddenly things have turned a little bit. Lisa is now sort of in the palm of her hand a little bit.
This is where the movie kind of kicks into gear for me a little bit, because I really didn't get much out of this up until that point, which is quite a stretch until we get here, really, besides that photo shoot scene, I wasn't really finding much of interest, either as a story or stylistically. But at least, once she's hooked on heroin, there's this long, like, woozy sequence where we got this, like, fisheye lens shot, and that's where Dazed and Confused comes in, and this random couple shows up that she starts having a three-way with, and it just has so much more, atmosphere and uneasiness to it.
I just found it so icky and uncomfortable, though.
Oh, it is.
Oh.
But I guess that was something for me. And again, when you have Dazed and Confused playing underneath it, it's like that gives you such a huge amp of atmosphere.
I just kept thinking about all the gross sex Robert Plant had, I don't know. It just made me think about Robert Plant.
Well, I think Roger Watkins' interest in horror is what really kicks in those last 15 minutes. I mean, all throughout the film, I think there are these little touches that, like the photo shoot, that combination of sex and violence. That's part of it, but also in those last 15 minutes, that's where that really disturbing sensibility comes through.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah,
I'm torn about the ending. I feel like it's easy to have a knee-jerk thing and say that it's like it's a generic sort of fall from grace thing, like, oh, a sex worker gets hooked on heroin and dies, and it is very, like, kind of anticlimactic and just a bummer on purpose. I don't know, because that has been like a big conceit of movies about sex workers, even movies about just like queer people in alternative lifestyles and things like that. So I definitely felt that here, and that kind of, I don't know, it just kind of weighed down the last act. It made it feel more like paint by numbers or something. Not that the rest was not. The rest was still pretty paint by numbers in some ways, but I don't know. It's at least a little bit more enjoyable or like stimulating. Then it just became more like black and dark, I guess.
I think that's what makes his films, actually not just this one, but a lot of the other adult films he made, so interesting, because he wasn't afraid to go to these really dark places.
It is more dynamic. I do appreciate that.
I mean, by the end, Lisa is just emotionally naked. She's so vulnerable, and it's just so sad. It's overwhelmingly sad.
Yeah, when she asks for like the last hit, basically, that is an overdose by the end. It's really, really
it kind
sad.
Of abruptly, I think it ends kind of abruptly with Carmen handing her the needle and saying, "Here, you do it," and we just go back to see her casket one last time, and it's like the end.
Yeah, pow, goes in her arm, cut to casket, the end. Like,
and it's got that song that plays near the end about how don't lose your soul. I mean, that just hurt.
Oh, yeah, that was right before Dazed and Confused, and that made me forget about it. But yeah, I was wondering what that song was.
Here comes the 80s.
Yeah, for sure. And yeah, I did struggle, I guess, the way that it kind of pivots to being this drug cautionary tale at the end. The whole arc of the movie, I guess I had trouble making sense of, is that, is this like a Reefer Madness kind of, downward spiral? Is it about the revenge that she gets on that guy, or about how after the revenge things only get worse? And it's hard for me to connect the whole movie together, because I don't feel like I ever got a sense of Lisa as a character and what she really, how her, desires or weaknesses or whatever played into her downfall. It all just seemed kind of muddled to me. And I did appreciate how it took that, dark, dramatic approach to everything. But I just wasn't sure what the through line was supposed to be here. And this really could, even though I thought that Samantha Fox did a fine job in it, this, could have benefited from a more like, transcendent central performance. Maybe if they had gotten Georgina from The Devil in Miss Jones or something to sell that stuff even more. Yeah, I don't know. I was kind of scratching my head a little bit about what I was supposed to be taking away from this. Like, is she just a victim all the way through? Is she somehow, tragically part of it? I needed something more.
I think that's just what you run into in a lot of Roger Watkins films, that life is just terrible. And that is the overwhelming thing. And no matter what you do, it's going to end badly. All of his films, both, all of the adult films, certainly. To be honest, I don't remember the ending of Last House on Dead End Street because I've tried to block it out of my memory. But all of his adult films are so bleak. And I think they're really just about creating a certain aesthetic and a certain mood. Sometimes they're extremely colorful. Like, there's another film called Corruption, which is even more boldly photographed. Like, just the reds and the greens. It's extreme, but the nihilism and the depression, that hits pretty hard. So I don't know if Roger Watkins even necessarily had a point. I think he just wanted to say that life is awful. So
it is interesting that his vessel for having like a nihilistic sort of depressive message is through sex, which is supposed to be or like supposed to be like this very joyous thing, or it's like it makes it even more, makes the sex very desperate and very like almost kind of like sad, because it is like more of like, this is like all we have, this is like all that we have that's good in this movie, or the only like bit of like light that's in this movie is through sex, and the like really depressive aspects of the story outside of the sex scenes like only heighten that, I guess, now that I think about it. And it does make me appreciate it a little bit more. Yeah.
I read I read that he claimed, at least, that he didn't direct the sex scenes, or that he refused to direct the sex scenes. That's what it says.
Oh, I think
like
did
on the
hear that.
Wikipedia. And I don't know if that's true. If it is, it begs the question of like, well, I feel like there's like 10-15 minutes of this movie that isn't sex scenes, so what did you even do if you didn't have any hand in directing those? But there is, I don't know, when he does start using those more ambitious like shot setups and visual things in the last 10 minutes, maybe that does seem like that's him finally engaging with it and throwing his style in. But I don't know, maybe I don't know how true that is, that maybe he just made that claim at some point. But
well, I do think that, considering that he didn't want to make adult films, maybe that is where all that cynicism and darkness comes from in the story. He didn't want to do it, so he just had to make it as dark as possible. I guess he figured that was the only way he could. He had to bring in the horror and the absolute bleakness.
There's a frustration. Yeah.
So although he did make a comedy, so I don't know exactly how well that idea holds up. He made a very silly comedy called The Pink Ladies, again with Samantha Fox and Vanessa Del Rio. Okay. And that's a delightful movie. So,
well, who is consistent, really? Who is truly consistent?
Yeah.
It's exhausting to be consistent.
Also worth noting, by the way, I think just a few days ago, a biopic of Vanessa Del Rio just opened. Like, it debuted at a film festival. So at some point, we will be seeing a feature film all about her fascinating life. Apparently, also with some of those, like, that mob background, the questions of, like, who was funding the porn industry is apparently also tied into it.
Yes.
So that should be entertaining.
I gotta see that.
Yeah, it's a very ripe just topic and era and subject matter for movies to attack, from Boogie Nights on. There's just, it's such an interesting time. And like you said, so much wrapped up into it culturally and politically. And we get a sense of the drug scene and the values and all of the different things that is just built into these movies, especially since they cover such a specific and limited time period. It's an extinct genre. So it really was interesting watching these movies and really feeling like I was seeing something like new for the first time. Like, there's so few really new things out there to discover, at least. And that,
I think it's also worth noting that a lot of people who worked in the porn industry in the 70s hated Boogie Nights. They thought it was terrible. They thought it didn't show anything about what the industry was really like. Showed people who had absolutely no talent. The Burt Reynolds figure is essentially supposed to be Gerard Damiano, from what I've read, and I think that's pretty unfair. So, very interesting. Very interesting, because I feel like that movie kind of gives a lot of people who've never seen an adult film from that era an idea of what it's supposed to be like, but it really isn't. So, yeah.
Yeah, that movie does like to want to have it both ways, where it has lots of fun poking fun at the production values and these, bad, very intentionally badly made film that Mark Wahlberg and John C. Reilly star in, like when you see a trailer for it, and the Julianne Moore character, like, who definitely can't act. And it's not like that stuff isn't based somewhat in reality. There are plenty of bad movies like that, I'm sure, but there is a sense that it does want to have as much fun, like poking fun and even mocking to an extent these people, and then also get as like dark as humanly possible in the last part, where everyone has their reckoning and is this lost soul or strung out on drugs. But that's for our Boogie Nights podcast,
right? Which in a way kind of Lisa made me think of Boogie Nights, because it has that kind of trajectory of like, maybe this is gonna be fun. Okay, we're having fun, and like, okay, now it's 80s flashes on the screen and things go sour.
The drugs ruin everything.
Which is really just like a big 70s archetype of just like having a good time, and then goes south, goes wrong. The 60s are over.
At the very best, most talented people were doing things that were way above anything that you see in Boogie Nights, which I think should be the feeling you get from having watched these three films, that there was some ability to create art.
Absolutely.
There was like a real artistic sensibility in some of this work.
Yeah, especially Misty Beethoven being like a legit sending your resume in to be like, hey, maybe these could be real movies. We could just have a genre of sexy comedies that are just full of sex and full of comedy. And also,
and elegant.
Something like Devil and Miss Jones, which is more of like, it's arty, it's artistic, it's atmospheric, but it's also fulfilling your sexual interests. Again, kind of functional. I keep on going back to that word.
Yeah, so I want to open up the floor again for any final thoughts about this movie or about porn or the era in general, and to answer our final question, which I'll start with, that this might have been my least favorite of the three. Yeah, I think it was. Although I still wasn't crazy about The Devil and Miss Jones, and with this one, it really was confined to like two sequences that I found striking. So I would probably consider unwatching this, not literally, but in the sense of making that distinction for this podcast. I definitely I'm a Misty Beethoven guy all the way, but I'm glad I watched all them.
Well, I think that this is definitely better than The Devil and Miss Jones, if only because I am a noted Samantha Fox fan, so I feel like any movie with her is going to be entertaining. And she was in one of my favorite Doris Wishman movies, A Night to Dismember. So I just have to love Samantha Fox, and it's just such to me, interestingly shot film. And again, the darkness, the sadness, it's memorable. I mean, it sticks with you. You'll keep thinking about it. So, not the greatest example of the era. Misty Beethoven is definitely better, but watchable for sure. This one.
Yeah, I don't know if I would seek it out again, but I am glad I watched it. I think I do appreciate aspects of it. Again, like the music and those montages are exciting, and I agree, Jetta. I do really like Samantha is the name. Samantha?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah,
Yep.
I really like her in this movie. if even just for vain reasons, I find her very attractive as a performer. That kind of keeps me from lowering this to a full-on unwatch. It was still like rather unpalatable, but I enjoyed it to a certain extent for sure, especially the sort of changeover at the end where Carmen starts out as sort of like a guardian angel who frees her and then is sort of part of her demise. I do appreciate that a bit. But yeah, it was off-putting at a lot of places for sure, which is its point. I get it.
Mm-hmm.
All right. Well, I really want to thank Jetta for joining on this and bringing all of this insight into this era and these three films in particular. It was definitely great to finally meet you after just, reading stuff on Letterboxd all the time.
Thank you. I really appreciate your inviting me.
Yeah, and definitely, check her out. She's the Iron Cupcake on Letterboxd and is quite a prolific movie watcher and reviewer. Is there anything else, that you wanted, anything you wanted to plug or say while you have the nation listening?
Two things, actually, that I thought of, and then I couldn't figure out where to put them in the conversation. One of the most entertaining anecdotes about The Devil and Miss Jones is Marc Stevens, who I mentioned earlier, who was in the threesome scene at the end of the film, was livid because he didn't get a close-up of his face in that scene. You see Georgina Spelvin and you see Levi Richards, but Marc Stevens wanted to be a superstar and he hated that he didn't get to have his face shown. So just something to think about. So if you ever rewatch that movie, you can just think about him just, going crazy.
We'll put his
and the
face
other
in the YouTube video as a small consolation prize to him.
Oh,
so.
If we can
so
find
sweet,
it.
Tony.
Also, there is a film that I think, actually I'll say two films that for anyone who wants to continue watching what I think are among the best films of that era and genre, there's one called Blonde Ambition by the Amaro brothers, John and Lem Amaro. It's kind of like a musical without really being a musical because it has one song, but it just has that joyous feeling of being a musical. So it's just absolutely delightful and colorful and fun, and and interesting costumes and sets and ice skating rinks and just like so many things you wouldn't expect to see in a porn film, even among porn comedies. So Blonde Ambition. I think the tagline was, if you loved Deep Throat and you loved Singing in the Rain, you're gonna love Blonde Ambition. So
Ooh,
hell yeah!
There you go.
I wrote it down. Everybody should write it down. Oh man, I'm watching it soon.
The second film was one called Roommates, which was by Chuck Vincent and also has Samantha Fox, and it got a glowing review from Judith Crist, one of the nation's leading film critics. So that's another drama, another interesting look at young women living in New York. And, I just think appreciating directors who can write dialogue and create interesting roles for actors and also create great sets, because apparently everyone loved working with Chuck Vincent, and Samantha Fox thought he was the best director and loved working with him. So I think those two films, Blonde Ambition and Roommates, I think those would be great entry points for people besides the films we've already seen.
All right, yes. I'll definitely make notes of those because, if nothing else, this got me more interested in being open to more of those, and I look forward to seeing what else lies in store.
I'm in. There's a lot to enjoy. More porn episodes.
Yeah,
Unwatchable in the fun way.
We tapped into a well here. I think we could probably do a part 2 on this down the road someday.
Absolutely.
I mean, I could honestly recommend films that I genuinely do think are unwatchable. So, just be aware of that.
We get into the real nasty ones next time.
Ooh, boy. Excellent.
Yeah, that's the name of the game.
As much as I try to avoid it, I try to avoid the thesis of this podcast when I can.
Do you think
there was like porn? Yay, let's do porn. Yes.
You know how there's like a whole thing, like an industry around like low budgets, like porn spoofs of mainstream films, like, mostly in the internet era. I wonder how many of those exist for movies we've covered on the podcast. Like if you go back, like you think there's a porn out there called like The Girth of a Nation?
Oh Lord.
Or like hold on, I can think of another one. No, actually, I don't know if I can. What other movies have we watched on this thing?
Dickamore. Freddy Got Fingered Real Hard.
Okay.
All right. Seth, I'm kicking Seth out of the chat.
I can keep going.
Freddy Got Fingers is its own porn parody.
Right.
Oh,
exactly.
Fucky Games, directed by Michael Haneke.
Thank you, Tony, for bringing this up.
Hey, mine was thoughtful. We'll workshop these, Seth.
Okay.
Always best to end with a whimper. Unwatchables is produced by Tony Scarpitti, hosted by me, Marc Dottavio, and Seth Troyer, with artwork by Micah Kraus. You can find Seth and I on Letterboxd under Marc Dottavio and Sloth Troyer. You can also check us out at unwatchablespod.com for links to our Twitter and Instagram, or support us on Patreon for bonus content and to have a say in what we watch. Thanks for listening.